Yes, there's a round of applause. And our final speaker for this session is Sally Roberts from the Scottish Government.
Now, bear with me while I find the right presentation. Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm Sally Thomas, and I head the Land Use and Biodiversity team at Scottish Government. I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to talk to you. Now, I'm going to cover four main things, time permitting, this afternoon. Firstly, just to give a quick canter through some of the policy context of the work that we've been doing in Scotland. Jessa has touched on much of it already, so I won't dwell on that too long. To look at some of the activities, the range of activities that there are across Scotland, and a piece of work that we did to try and bring that information together. To focus in on one of those projects, which is the Carse of Stirling project, a demonstration project in the centre of Scotland, and then to look at the land use strategy pilot projects, which are underway, which started earlier this year. So just briefly on the policy context, really, just as I say, touched on much of this already. But I think it's quite important that we put the work that we're doing in Scotland into context, and there are two key policy documents, really, which I'd just like to highlight. The first of these is the land use strategy, and I know Wales is ahead of many of us in many things, but I think actually we're in the lead on this one, I'm afraid to say, in Scotland. Land use strategy, we know it's unique in the UK, and we think it's certainly the first of its kind in Europe. It sets the Scottish Government's strategic policy direction on land use. It was published in March of 2011, and it stems from the Scottish climate change legislation. And it's important because it signals really quite a fundamental shift in Scottish Government thinking towards integrated land use and towards the use of an ecosystems approach. And this, you can see, is the vision, which is the vision for 2050 contained within the strategy. It has three objectives, as Jessa mentioned. These are highlighted in full here. What I would also, I suppose, draw your attention to in the strategy is that, as well as these three objectives, there are three what we call shifts in approach. These are not hard and fast actions. They are changes in the way we do business, which we would like to see coming about as a result of people applying the principles of the land use strategy. And those three shifts in approach are delivering multiple benefits, partnerships with nature, and linking people to the land. And they're very much about how we do business, how we make things happen. Now, the second policy document is the refreshed Biodiversity strategy for Scotland, published in June of this year. It's Scotland's response to the HE targets. It sits alongside the 2004 strategy, and the two documents together form our biodiversity strategy in Scotland. It builds very much on the thinking in the land use strategy, in that it's thinking about ecosystems and the use of an ecosystems approach. So we're focusing less on individual species and habitats, and more, I suppose, on those species and habitats within the context of the wider ecosystem. Three policy aims within that document: protect and restore biodiversity on land and in our seas, and supporting healthier ecosystems; connecting people with the natural world for their health and well-being and involving them more in decisions about their environment; and maximising the benefits for Scotland of a diverse natural environment and the services it provides, contributing to sustainable economic growth. We've also published a couple of information notes, which you might like to check out on our website. The first of these was published back in 2011 and is, I suppose, a general introduction to applying an ecosystems approach. And the second is aimed mainly at community planning partnerships and focuses on green infrastructure. I think it's fair to say, though, that in preparing those information notes, and indeed in the work we've been doing more recently on the biodiversity strategy, that we certainly see that there are, I suppose, three key steps to take. Considering how natural systems work, taking account of the services that ecosystems provide to people, and lastly, involving people. And these really, I suppose, are our attempt to boil down those 12 principles into three easy-read messages. So, we wanted to have a look at having got the right words, well, we think the right words, in more or less the right places and hopefully in the right order. We wanted to have a look at whether actually that was translating into activity on the ground in Scotland. So we decided we would have a look, last year we'd have a look at what types and what range of activities there were in Scotland for different organisations and groups applying an ecosystems approach in their locality. So we contacted around about 50 different organisations, local authorities, agencies, NGOs, the community land trusts, a whole variety really, to find out what they were doing, whether they were using an ecosystems approach. We supplied them with a template, but we didn't want to be too directive, so we didn't want to say, this is what we think an ecosystems approach is and looks like, so if yours project doesn't look like that, we don't want to hear about it. We said, if you think this is what you're doing, please tell us about it. And we had about 25, 26 or so organisations respond, which was great. And some of those project case studies have now been written up, and you can access those on the Ecosystems Knowledge Network. I was going to just look at some analysis that we did as well of those projects which responded, which I'll go through fairly briefly in a moment. But this map, I'm not sure whether you can read the locations of the project, but this map gives you an idea of the spread across Scotland of those different projects. Some of them quite large in area. Those are the hatched areas, the shaded areas, and some of them quite small localities represented there by the dots. I think what it does show, though, is there's actually quite a fair proportion of Scotland that's been touched in some way by an ecosystems approach, which is very encouraging. When we looked at the drivers for these approaches, we found that where there was a single driver, the single focus by and large was on climate change, but many of these projects, they had multiple policy drivers behind them and very much so on policy integration. There were three main types of approach in the projects happening across Scotland. Community-based approaches tended to focus on engagement. Community engagement is a key focus aspect of the project. The research-based projects involved communities a lot less and tended to be often quite data and monitoring driven. And in some projects there was an identified conflict or problem which people had come together to try to resolve. A whole range of tools actually which people were using. The SNH toolkit there, talking about our place, highlighted and used by a number of projects. Planning guidance was being used by some local authorities, and a whole range of different methodologies were being developed as well. And primarily three scales at which people were undertaking the work. The farm unit, at a catchment scale, or at a county scale across Scotland. So one of those projects which I'd like to highlight is the Carse of Stirling project. You can find out more information about that either on its own website or again through the Ecosystems Knowledge Network, through their directory. This is a view looking from Stirling Castle out towards the Carse of Stirling. And this project came together as, I suppose, a desire from Scottish Natural Heritage, from SEPA and from Scottish Government to demonstrate how an ecosystems approach can be applied in practice to improving the benefits for people and for nature. And it's one of a number of different pieces of work, and the land use strategy pilots, which I'll come to in a moment, are another area of work. These are the project ambitions. It was very much a project about people, about their preferences, and about how we use the information that local communities have to assist us in driving the policy directions which we in government are hoping we can take forward. I would say that the project was agency initiated, in that the impetus came from agencies within Scotland. They wanted to produce something tangible and useful for the community. It was consultant facilitated and led. Land use consultants were engaged to undertake the project, and a number of reasons for that, but I think it's good to recognise that an agency-led project is not always going to be the best way forward, and that was recognised in this instance. So this was a contractor-led project, or facilitated, and it was stakeholder-led. And the way that was done was to bring together a stakeholder panel of around about 30 individuals from both within the area and those from out with the area who used the Carse of Stirling quite heavily, and to bring those together in a facilitated process to go through a number of key steps in the project. This slide just shows you the main kind of panel meetings that were held and the sorts of issues which were discussed and identified throughout the project. There were a number of lessons learned from that project, which I'll run through very briefly. Four lessons, really. Firstly, that the engagement and involvement of stakeholders is absolutely key, and it's about empowering people in those local communities to come forward and make decisions about their own local area. And that while agencies may have a specific remit, they need to be able to take a step back and let local people engage. Second lesson was around benefits. Who benefits and who is this project for? And in the Carse of Stirling case, it was very much a project led by and for the local people. Thirdly, I suppose this is about giving stakeholders credit, because people very clearly do understand the need to make the most of the natural assets of the area. In this case, many of the individuals were farmers. They do understand trade-offs. They find technical information often difficult to interpret, but that doesn't mean that they don't understand what we're trying to do. And I think the overriding lesson is to keep it simple. The net result was a vision statement and an action plan for the Carse of Stirling. The vision statement and the action plan were brought together by the consultants who were working on the project. The stakeholder group is now going forward with some support, and there's some funding and support for a further year to enable them to take forward the actions in the action plan, and it's hoped that it will then become a self-sustaining project. Now, I'd like to go back to the land use strategy and just to tell you briefly about the land use strategy pilot projects. This is an outcome-focused approach. It's around delivering practicing what we preach, I suppose, in the land use strategy in Scotland. We've asked 2 local authorities within Scotland to take forward a project to do this, to test and evaluate the practicality of preparing regional land use frameworks. We've asked them to prepare frameworks for their locality which will cover the full range of different land uses within their area, which will have regard to the principles of the land use strategy, which will be at sufficiently detailed scale that decisions can be made about individual portions of land. So that means that decisions can be informed by this regional framework for funding for rural development programme monies, for grant applications and so forth. We've asked them to look at the opportunities and the constraints within that area, and crucially we've asked them to do this by using an ecosystems approach. So this is the aim of the 2 pilot projects. And I suppose a couple of key points really is that we've asked the local authorities to cover the whole geographic area, but we recognise that that's probably going to be quite a difficult thing to do, and that they may wish to drill down, I suppose, and look at maybe case studies or target focus areas within the wider area for their authority. I think it's perhaps worth just saying why we've chosen local authorities. We felt it was very important that we had an organisation in the lead for the pilot projects which has a democratic mandate within the area. Some, indeed probably many, of the land uses which will be dealt with through these frameworks are not ones that you would normally associate with a local authority having a decision-making power over. but we were very keen to tie this work into the other policy agendas that local authorities have. So planning, for example, health and well-being, education, and flood management were perhaps four of the very important ones. So we were very keen that not only should they be led by the local authorities, but they would have a very strong cross-authority engagement and a strong stakeholder involvement as well. And their objective there is to provide a framework to support decisions about land use change. So this isn't just about land management, it's actually about land use change, and to facilitate those decisions, so decisions about grants and incentives. And what we're asking them to try to do, and as these are pilots, we honestly don't know whether this is going to be successful or not, but we're hoping that they can produce a framework which will be dynamic. We're not looking for a master planning approach, we're looking for something which can be continually updated and can be interrogated and can be used on an ongoing basis going forward. So the two authorities that have agreed to participate are Aberdeenshire and Scottish Borders. I'm not sure if you can see the red dots there on the map, both on Aberdeenshire up on the east coast there, and Scottish Borders, as you'd expect, on the border with England. So if we zoom in a bit, here's Aberdeenshire, and you can see the area of the council wrapping around Aberdeen City. Aberdeenshire is a very diverse area. It has a lot of coastal land, as you can see. It has a number of small towns and a very close proximity to Aberdeen. There are a lot of pressures for forestry and onshore wind development, and the characteristics of the land resource are really very varied. A couple of examples here. We've got here you can see one of the distilleries, I think that is. The area includes part of Cairngorm National Park, and you can see forestry there, and a lot of upland, of course, in the western side of Aberdeenshire. Scottish Borders, very large area, predominantly a rural area. Again, a number of recognised pressures in the area, particularly around forestry and onshore wind development again. Has very strong local communities. It has a number of communities with a really dreadful history of flooding. The council has taken a very proactive approach, I think, certainly in the biodiversity field. They've been pioneering work on biodiversity offsetting. And crucially in this area, there is a long-standing and very effective partnership known as the Tweed Forum, who work throughout the whole of the Tweed catchment, which is almost the same as the area of Scottish Borders Council. And the council here have elected to work in partnership with Tweed Forum on the pilot project. 3 key stages to the project work: a baseline mapping stage, a policy mapping, and a resource or asset mapping, both of these to be a GIS-based mapping as far as possible. An identification of constraints and opportunities, really looking where the natural resources in the area can perhaps help to better deliver the policy objectives for the local authority and for their partners. And then finally, a production of a framework, we hope. And these are the timescales. So you can see we're still in stage 1, we're still at those early stages where the mapping work is still underway. The 2 authorities are at slightly different stages. Scottish Borders is a little bit more advanced. Aberdeenshire are going to be working with the James Hutton Institute on the mapping work. Scottish Borders Council have elected to employ Environment Systems, who are based here in Wales, to work on the baseline mapping with them. And in fact, Katie Medcalf, who's leading that work at the conference today. So any technical aspects of mapping, please don't ask me, ask Katie, because she's here. I thought I'd just show you some of the mapping and the data work from the borders, just to give you an idea of the type of work that's underway at the moment. So looking at the NEA classification, looking at the type of service it is, this is soil carbon storage. These are the types of data sets that we're beginning to look at, or I should say the borders are beginning to look at. And then these are beginning to be translated into a GIS mapping. What we're trying to do at this stage is very much look at the stock, look at what the assets are within an area. Provisioning services, recreation, non-motorised access. You can see the long list of data sets there on the right-hand side. data is a big issue, actually, both the availability of it, the cost of it, the fact that some organisations won't let you have it, and when you do get it, it may not be compatible with other data that you already have. So data is a big issue around all of this. This is the type of map on the types of maps coming out on the recreation side. Perhaps a more difficult service to map, perhaps one that we maybe would shy away from. Again, different types of data sets here used. Sporting and tourism. The borders is an area where sporting interests are really important, both the shooting and the fishing, particularly the River Tweed. I don't think anybody won't have heard of the Tweed as an area for salmon fishing, really important for the area. And then this is an example of another of the maps. This is current timber provision. So we've just about, I think, in the borders got to the point where we've got a good set of baseline maps, going to start to begin to layer those together, see how this kind of sieving begins in putting all that information together, where the constraints are, where the opportunities are. And it's not a static process. As new data becomes available, there's always the opportunity to add in and to rerun the model and refine those maps. Before I finish, I want to just kind of run through three other things that thread right the way through the land use strategy pilot projects. The first of these is stakeholder engagement, absolutely critical to the ultimate success of the pilots. It will run throughout the whole of the process from beginning to end. There will be a formal consultation period on the pilots. Both of the pilot authorities will run those themselves, but we are aiming for what I would call a no surprises consultation. We really want to take stakeholders with us, and we've made this clear to the pilot authorities that we would expect them to work very, very closely with their stakeholders from day one to the final production of the framework. In the borders, the Tweed Forum are going to be leading the stakeholder engagement work. They're a long-standing and a trusted partnership in the area, and they've got very extensive experience of working on the ground with stakeholders in that area. In Aberdeenshire, I think they will be doing more of the engagement in-house. Strategic environmental assessment is a requirement, and we've recommended, and we're working with both the pilot authorities, that the SEA should be undertaken in tandem with the preparation of the framework. So it becomes an iterative process. We're certainly not looking for the SEA to be done at the end of the process, and certainly our experience within government is that you get a much better product, both for the framework and the policy document and for the SEA if you work in an iterative way. And finally, evaluation, and in fact picking up on that comment from the previous presentation, we have a contract out for evaluation. The evaluation of the pilots will run concurrently with the work that's being undertaken in the authorities. That is primarily a process evaluation. We want to understand how the process is or is not working, what the barriers are, and how stakeholders are reacting and relating to the work that's ongoing. We also hope to evaluate the success of the pilots once they have finished, and we have a bit of cash set aside for that if nobody raids the piggy bank in the next couple of years, where hopefully we can undertake an impact evaluation towards the end or after they have finished. Now, I was hoping to deal with research, but I don't think I'm going to have time to do that, am I? No, I'm getting a shake of the head there, so I will finish there. But what I would say is there's a lot of information about the land use strategy, particularly on the Scottish Government website. Do look at the Ecosystems Knowledge Network and have a look at the Scottish section on that, because there's a real wealth of information about ecosystems approach initiatives right across Scotland with a whole range of different organisations are undertaking. So there's a lot of information about what's happening in Scotland. Thank you.